Okay, so counting significant figures. In a nutshell, let me explain why you need to use significant figures. It's going to explain it in your notes, but I'll just verbally tell you. When we go into a lab and we measure values, they have a specific number of digits that are precise. In other words, for example, if I were to measure on a balance and it has 2 decimal places, and let's say I measured 10 different masses, and so I added them up and divided them and got an average, okay? So my balance will only go to 2 places, but if I put those numbers in a calculator and divide by 10, how many decimal places will a calculator often give you? A lot. We'll go with a lot, okay? And the problem with writing down all of those decimals, if it's a measured value, the more decimals you're writing down, you're indicating the precision of that measurement, okay? So we can't have our calculations be more precise than our measured value. So we have to limit the way we write our answers down, okay? So that's basically what we're going to be doing when we do significant figures, okay? So we're always, when we're reading a measurement, we're always going to read it to what we know it has, and then we're going to estimate the next digit, okay? Unless it's digital in the case of a balance, okay? But if we were looking, say, at a graduated cylinder, we would look at the bottom of the meniscus. We know it was between, 45 and 46, but it's not exactly on the line, so we would try to estimate maybe 45.3 if it was just barely above the line. Okay, so the last digit is always going to be an uncertain digit, but you must estimate it, okay? So in this case, we have a nail that's 6.36 centimeters long. The 6.3 is the certain value. The 6 is uncertain because someone estimated that, okay? So here's kind of an example of that. If you were to read where that had, you would report 1 extra digit. You would estimate what that digit is, okay? So you add 1 certain, so there's what it is up close, okay? So you might look at it and say it's 6.35. Someone else might look at it and say, I think it's 6.34, or I think it's 6.36. So that's where that last digit is an uncertain digit. We would not write down 6.353. We can't estimate that much. You only do 1 digit extra of estimation. Okay? So we indicate the precision of the measurement. So if I were to measure this, what would you call that? So if you do the line, it's like 2.35, okay? So you kind of have to draw the line there. So there, the 2.3 would be certain. We know it's at least 2.3. The 5 on the end would be uncertain. It would be an estimation. And there's not, on the estimation, there's not a right or a wrong. It's how you visually see it, okay? Because I see kids in there arguing about it. If you think it's 0.35, you write 0.35. If your partner thinks it's 0.34, let them write 0.34. That last digit is an uncertain digit. On that one, what would you call that? What's the known digit? 4. Okay, so 4 is going to be certain, and then what would you call the second digit? Okay, 4.5 they called it, but you're not wrong by saying 4.6. That's your estimation. Okay, now if I do it with this ruler, it's more precise. Okay, so I would say 4.5 is known, and it goes slightly over, so they called it 4.54. And this one, they said it's exactly on the line, so instead of just writing 3, they would write 3.0 to let them know that it was on there, okay? So we always include 1 extra digit of uncertainty, okay? So if I were to read this one, and we always read at the bottom of the meniscus, what would you call this? You would call it 15? 15.0. What's going on? There it goes. 15? Nope. It would be 15.0. And that's important for our calculations, okay? Because if you just wrote down 15 and you start doing your calculations, you would say that your calculations, you'll see, would be limited by 2 significant figures when in fact it should have been 3, okay? Which we'll talk about how we recognize. You could also put it in scientific notation, but in here and in most places, you only use scientific notation for really, really big numbers or really, really small numbers. Do not use them for what I call normal numbers that you recognize. Like your brain recognizes 15.0 easier than it recognizes that. Okay? So anything that's over about 100,000 or so, start putting in scientific notation. Anything that's a decimal that's got more than 3 or 4 zeros in front of it, then put that in scientific notation. Okay? But I will say this, if you put down something with 9 zeros, I'm not going to count them. I'm just going to assume you're wrong. So put it in scientific notation. Don't make me count 9 zeros to see if you're right. Okay? So the rules for counting the number of significant values are this. Okay? All numbers other than a 0 are significant. They count every single time. 1 through 9 always count. Okay? It's the zeros that get you into trouble. So leading zeros do not count. Okay, so the zeros in that number are not significant. They're placeholders. Okay, they're just telling you where that 5 should go. They are just placeholders. So this value would only have one significant figure. Captive zeros, or sometimes they're called sandwiched zeros, always count. Okay, if they're between a number, they always count. Okay, so 405 would have 3 significant figures. Trailing zeros only count if there is a decimal, okay? If there's a decimal, it counts. If it's not a decimal, it doesn't, okay? So in the case of 5,000, there is not a decimal, so it's only one significant figure, because most likely that's an estimation, okay? If it was 50.00, because of that decimal and because there's a number in front of it, a whole number in front of it, all 4 of those would be significant. This takes practice. It's always about the zeros, okay? So let's practice this a little bit. So in A, how many of those digits or how many of those numbers would be called significant?
6.
All 6. So I will often write 6SF like that. And on your paper, if you ever see like -1 SF, it's because you didn't have the right significant figures. Okay? Because I do take off. Because that's something that's important for the AP exam and in chemistry. How about B? How many would it have? 2. And how about C? It would have 4. Okay? Anytime you have a decimal with no number, you keep going until you get to the first actual number, oops, and then everything that comes behind it, okay, is significant. The way I tell kids to look at it is if they took the trouble to write down those zeros when they didn't have to, they must be significant. Because if I had taken and just written 0.057, does that change the value of the number really? No, okay. So, but the fact that I went ahead and included those zeros means they must have been important. That means I could have measured to that level, okay. And then how about D? 1 significant figure. Okay? I have this flow chart over here that kind of helps you when you're going through this process. Actually, I got this out of y'all's book under the reference in chapter 2, and I just made posters for everybody. So you can go through this. Does the number start with a 0? And if you say yes, then you start counting significant digits from the first non-zero number. Okay? Then you go, does the decimal, does it have a decimal point? If you say no, you say, does the number end in a 0? Yes, stop counting when you reach the last non-zero number. So you can go through this flow chart as you're doing this if you'd like, okay? Same thing as if does the number start with a 0, you just follow through the chart, okay? If you want to print one of those out, there's one in your book, or you can just snap a picture of that. I didn't put that in your notes, did I? Okay. So that's how you count if they're significant, okay? And it's all about the zeros, and it just takes some practice. If you're putting these numbers in scientific notation from a regular number, if the number is significant, you have to include it in your scientific notation. So somebody was asking on one of those paper, I think it was like 1,000,000, and they said, how do I know? Do I write down 1 or do I write down 1.0? If there wasn't a decimal, you would just write 1 times 10 to the 6, okay? So you have to include the significant figures when you're putting it in scientific notation. Okay? So there's an example there. Because this 7143 is significant, you have to include it when you write it in scientific notation. Okay? Oh, that's the flow chart, but it's not, I didn't print it out for you guys, I'm sorry. All right, so in scientific notation, what would these be? Okay. Huh? How many significant figures would it have? 3. Okay. We just ignore this. We don't, in terms of if it's significant or not. Okay, not in terms of the calculation, but we say it's not significant. How many would B have? It would have 3. Because there's a decimal, that 0 counts. Okay, because it's exactly 7.4. And then this would also have 3. Okay? Yes?
So what if it's like 750? It would be all 3, right?
If I did like this number right here,
Yes.
without a decimal, it would only have 2. Okay? Because we don't know if that's an exact number or a rounded number. Okay? For instance, we're talking about the flood all the time. They're saying approximately 3,000 homes flooded in Friendswood. Okay, we don't know the exact number. That's an estimation. So 3,000 without knowing the exact number would have 1 significant figure. Okay? But if I wrote it like this with the decimal, the fact that I put the decimal there means it's an exact number, so this would have 3 significant figures. Okay? It's all about the decimal when it comes to zeros. Okay? So that's how you count them. Okay? Now let's talk about how you do math with them. And this, quite frankly, is the harder part. Okay? Because just to keep it fun and interesting, there's different rules if you're adding and subtracting than if you're multiplying and dividing. Okay? So if you are adding and subtracting, you are looking at the decimal places. You're looking at only the decimal places. And you match it, the answer, to the one with the smallest number of decimal places. Okay? So in this case, you have this number right here. It only has, and this is what I tell kids to do through this part. I've got 3 decimals here, and I have 1 decimal here. So I'm going to do the operation in my calculator, okay? And I'm going to put my answer with 1 decimal place. Okay? If I do this, it comes out to 9.734 milliliters. Okay? But I only need 1 decimal place, so how would I report this number? 9.7, which is down at the bottom. Okay? Now, I didn't need to round because it was a 3 behind there. But you have to round to get the right answer. Okay? And surprisingly enough, rounding seems to be a problem for a lot of kids. Okay? Not when we're doing decimals, but when we're doing whole numbers. So we're going to talk about that in a second. Okay? So you match the decimals. So let's try these real quick. Okay? This has 1 decimal. This has 3 decimals. So when I put my answer down, I'm going to put it in 3 decimals. So this comes out to be 6.307. And so when I round that to 1, it would be 6.3 milliliters. Get in the habit of putting your units down. This one has 0 decimals, and this one has 2. So when I do this, I get 49.01. So I would write that as 49 grams. Okay? So that's how you do that. Okay? For multiplying and dividing, oh, well, how about that? I subtracted. Is that the right answer if you subtract? Okay, change that to subtraction then. That's easier than rewriting the whole thing. You know what? I've been subtracting it for years. It's in my notes that way. I guess because the other 2 are subtraction, I just assumed it was. I'll add it next time. At least you figured out what I did, right? Okay, so now let's do multiplying and dividing. Okay, multiplying and dividing, you are not looking at decimal places. You do not care about decimal places. You care about the total number of significant figures. And then you put your answer to match your total number of significant figures. Okay? So, in this case, we have 61, which has 2 significant figures, and this has 3 significant figures. So when we do our answer, we're going to have to put it in 2 significant figures. So we do our multiplication, and then we get this answer right here, and then in order to put it to 2 significant figures, we do 0.45, and then our unit would be centimeters cubed because we multiplied a centimeter times a centimeter. Okay? So hopefully I did all the next ones right. Let's look. Okay, so before we do that, let's always figure out how many we have. We have 2 here, and we have 4 here. Does anybody question why that's only 4? These are leading zeros, so they don't count in terms of significant figures. So I multiply that number out, and I get 0.001275. So I need to put that in 2 significant figures. So how would I report that? 13 meters squared, because you always look at that last one. That 7 rounds that up. Okay? So I want you to do the next 2 and tell me what you get and how you would report it. And if you need a calculator, they're over there on the wall. I should have said you need a calculator today. I usually put that on the, I'll add that for next period. If you have one, great. If you don't, grab one of mine. Okay, so did everybody get 9 centimeter cubed and 5.136 when you did it in the right significant figures? Okay, so before we end this lesson, I want to talk a little bit about rounding, okay? And I want to talk about rounding when we're doing whole numbers because that's where we tend to mess up, okay? So this is not in your notes. I just want to talk to you about the rounding a little bit, okay? So let's say I'm going to write down, I'm just going to make up this number, 14,567, and I say, please put that into 3 significant figures. So how would you write that in 3 significant figures? How would you report that? 14,600, okay? How many of you thought that we should have wrote down 146? Nobody? Oh, well, then I guess I don't need to go over this. Yeah, usually they think that. Because you have to replace what you round with zeros. Okay, because that's been a problem in the past. I always think of it in terms of if it were money, and I said, you owed me some money, and I said, just pay me in 3 significant figures, I would be very upset if you only gave me $146 instead of $14,600. Okay? Think I could try that with my contractors? I'm going to pay you in 3 significant figures. $146. So everybody understands that. Well, then that just made my life easier because that's usually a battle we fight every year. Okay? So your